Welcome to the Igniting Change podcast. My name is Duncan Cook, founder of Three-Sided Cube, trusted technology partner for some world-changing organizations. We know the power that technology has to have a positive impact on people's lives. But on this podcast, myself and my co-hosts Puff and Sophie are out to meet the people behind the technology, hear their stories and understand what drives them, and hopefully inspire others to join the mission and do some good in the world.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Did you want to give us an introduction, who you are and what organisation you're with, and maybe tell us a bit about how you got to the position that you're in today?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. My name is Brittany Dernberger, and I am a public speaker, a professor, a researcher, an evaluator, and I get really excited about using data and storytelling to create social change. My career has focused on gender and social inequality across several sectors, which I'm happy to chat more about. So I've worked in higher education, I've worked in philanthropy, I've worked for domestic nonprofits in the United States. I spent some time at the US Department of Defense doing sexual assault research. And I currently work at CARE, which is a large international NGO. And we focus on international development and humanitarian work to eradicate poverty and achieve social justice with a specific focus on women and girls. And I've been at CARE for a little more than 2 years, and I lead our systems level impact initiative. So really thinking about how we make structural change beyond just direct program delivery and how we measure that. My PhD is in sociology, so I'm trained to think about structures and systems. And so I get really nerdily excited about figuring out how we measure some of these like really squishy, intangible social change outcomes. And I also co-chair the American Evaluation Association Systems and Evaluation Topical Interest Group, which is a mouthful. The acronym is SETIG, but in the last year in that role, I've gotten a chance to really learn more about how other evaluators and organizations are thinking about how they measure structural change and systems change. So it's a lot of fun.
I mean, wow, you've done a lot, but also I'm loving the focus on the measurement piece and understanding the impact, because that it's not easy. That's super hard to do, and you say it so so casually, Brittany, that it's just, I don't know. I'm impressed. Everyone that I've had the pleasure of speaking with has always struggled with being able to measure that and I guess monitor and measure it, and how you do that moving forwards. It's not an easy thing to do.
No, and it has really been a learning journey. I think a fun aspect of a role like this is you're kind of hired to come in and build it. And so it's a lot of learning by doing. And so it's been very iterative, like where we were at 2 years ago in terms of thinking about how CARE measures our systems level impact is very different than where we're at today. And it's just been through a series of trial and error and working with teams across the organization to just say, can we try this? And we're going to learn a lot, and it might not totally work the way we think it will, but we'll figure it out. And so every time we do another study or another evaluation, we get a little bit better at it and we keep refining it. So it's been just like this great intellectual curiosity that I've gotten to play with.
But that's amazing. And you know, there's so many similarities to the approach that you describe in terms of building to learn. Similarities to software design and development. Because I say there are two main approaches to projects. You can build something to learn, or you can build something to scale. And actually, that building to learn is super important, especially when you're having to try new things and work with new people and new teams. It's really, really hard. And it's an entirely different skill set and approach to building something that needs to scale and to work. You have to do the build to learn first before you can do the build to scale. Typically, is what we say here at Three Sided Cube.
I'm gonna write that down and take that with me. That is so good, because I think that's exactly what we have been. That's what we've been doing. We just didn't have that handy way to talk about it, about learning versus scaling, because CARE operates in 110 countries, and so part of our challenge is how do you try and build frameworks and ways to measure this impact that tells the story of what CARE is doing across the Confederation, but in 110 very, very different contexts that have different situations and norms and things going on. So I love that. That's a really helpful way to think about it.
Well, look, we digress because we're here today. We have a series of episodes celebrating International Women's Day. And I think with your background, Brittany, you're going to be the perfect person to answer some key questions that we have. And we can dive into this in a little bit more detail. So my first question to you is, why do you think it's important for more women to join the tech industry, and how do you see them shaping the future?
So I have to confess, my image of the tech industry comes from like pop culture, Silicon Valley bros who, it's just like this very like white men in their 20s who are like sitting on beanbag chairs like that. That's my image of the tech industry. So that's I guess worth interrogating why that's our image. We know that it's dominated by men. Sociologists talk about this concept of gender occupational segregation, or occupational segregation by gender, which is like, especially in American and Western contexts, people tend to end up in certain occupations and certain disciplines divided by gender. And that has a lot of implications for pay inequality, for status and prestige. Like typically, the types of careers women end up in are more likely to be considered lower status, lower paid, and occupations that men end up in are typically better compensated and considered higher status. So I think when we think about STEM fields and technology and other scientific fields, like it can't just be a certain group of people, whether that's gender or race or other identity categories. We benefit so much from having women and people of color, people from low income backgrounds in all industries, but I think especially industries like technology that are so prolific, right? Like we all use technology in different ways in our daily lives. And if those are only being built and designed by a certain group of people, that just limits, I think, their utility for others. And so I would say it's important on a bunch of different levels for women to join the tech industry. And I think in terms of shaping the future, women and other voices that have been historically marginalized can help us identify tools and different applications for technology that if you only have one group of people in the room, we're just going to miss, because, we can't all know everything. And so getting those diverse perspectives, whether it's artificial intelligence or data collection tools or social media apps, like we need a wider array of voices in those rooms.
I totally agree. And it's something that I personally am really quite passionate about. But hearing you talk about your perception of the tech industry, you are so not alone, Brittany. Like there are so many people that have the same perception. And what I would say to people, anyone listening, anyone interested in getting into the tech space, it's not just that. I'm not saying that doesn't exist. There are definitely some truths there, but there are lots of different angles and lots of different routes that you can take into the tech world, and quite a lot of roles now, all kinds of roles that maybe people naturally wouldn't associate with tech. People are having to use tech in their everyday lives. They're having to use software, and a lot of the time they're actually completing technical tasks without thinking about it too much. They don't really realize how much tech they're using. So I would say to people, do challenge your perception of what you think the tech industry is, and go away and do a little bit of research and see what other routes that you can take into the tech industry, because it is vast, it is wide, there are so many different roles and so many different responsibilities that lean on tech quite heavily to be able to achieve that positive impact. And I think certainly today, and you were talking about care and it operating in so many different countries, without technology,
Exactly.
you would struggle to do, right? Technology is enabling you to be able to deliver on the mission of the organization. And actually, when you position it like that, when you reframe it like that, whilst I'm not saying it's a tech company, you are an organization that is using tech for positive impact, but perhaps unknowingly so, if that makes sense.
It does. Well, and yes, where I was, my mind was going with that is not only am I on Zoom or Teams, all day, every day, working with people around the world, but many of the participants in the countries where care is working do not have a smartphone, do not have regular access to technology in the way that those of us in a Western context often do. And I think that's a really important piece of this conversation. So not only who is in the tech industry designing for tech, but who has access to this technology. And there's a whole body of work around the global gender digital divide, where if you look at all of the people around the world who don't have access to the internet, for example, on a regular basis, like a disproportionate share of those people are women. And so what does that mean in terms of access to information, access to livelihoods and making a living? I used to do in a previous life some research around the future of work, and I remember there's some scholars who talk about, we've had 3 big technology innovations, if you're looking like at human history, that have changed the nature of work: the steam engine, the assembly line, and the smartphone. And so, in our lifetime, we've had this new piece of technology that has changed the way we do so many things, right? From like directions when I'm driving somewhere to how I interact with other people and other systems. And so we need to go back to your original question, like we need women and we need diverse voices holistically throughout that whole system, from like designing it to the end user.
I would definitely agree. And I think going back to those like 3 key phases, I would say we're like in one now with, and I hate to say it, but artificial intelligence and just the way that this is evolving right now. Like I know it's been around for many years, but the adoption and just the possibilities now, it's scary. And if women aren't involved in this, it's like I just can't, like I don't even want to think about it. But this is why, to me, it's so important that we inspire other women and we inspire other people that perhaps wouldn't be or wouldn't consider themselves technical or think that they're not capable of a technical role. Well, actually, you perhaps are, but you just need to reframe what you think that or what you think the tech industry is, because it just touches so many different aspects of life now that it'd be mad to think otherwise. Right. What advice would you have, Brittany, for young women aspiring to pursue a career in technology? Are there any specific skills or qualities that you think that they should focus on developing?
Oh, yes. So my career, we've already talked about it, has like existed in a lot of different places. But I would say, in addition to substantively focusing on gender and social inequality, I've technically really found a place in research and evaluation. And there are 2 things I would say for people interested in technology and kind of thinking about using technology in research and evaluation ways. One is to get experience. And that could be through things like internships and like entry-level jobs, but also things like a class project or a volunteer opportunity. I think we again think about a very American context, but we put a lot of emphasis on like what is your degree? You know, oh, maybe you need to major in computer science or engineering, or I think again we have a very specific idea of what like the pipeline to the tech industry looks like, but it's not always about the degree. Like I majored in women and gender studies and sociology for my undergrad, and then got a master's in public administration, you know, thinking about nonprofit leadership, and then took this little bit of a pivot to a PhD in sociology. And along the way I was working in different jobs and doing consulting and getting these experiences. And I have worked with a lot of young people and some of my own research on this topic. When people are finishing their education and looking for a job, if they're not successful, often the first impulse is like, well, I better get another degree, or maybe I should like get this online certificate, or we revert back to this, and then you just have another degree or another certificate and still like not the experience. So that would be one big piece of advice, is like anything you can do to just like get your hands messy is super useful. And equally important is finding out what you don't like. Like I often tell this to undergrad students I work with. Like if you have an internship and you're like, whew, this is not for me, that's super valuable information, because now you can think about, okay, I don't like that industry, or that particular work environment was not the best fit for me. That is such important information. All internships should be paid. I will die on that hill. So I'd say don't take an unpaid internship. But to the extent that you can find opportunities to work on hands-on projects, is really useful for your own learning and development, but also showing future employers that you have some of these skills. And then the second I would say is to just be curious and follow your curiosities. I think some of the best jobs I've had in my career are jobs that if you had asked me like 2 years prior, I didn't even know existed. And so, you know, to be honest, I had not heard of CARE, which is this huge, massive NGO. I had not heard of CARE when I applied, because I didn't come from the international development space. And I remember my first conversation with a recruiter, she was like, tell me about, you know, your experience and familiarity with CARE. And I was honest, just said, yeah, I had never heard of it, but it was this job that focused on like gender inequality and social change and systems change, which is what I do. So it seemed really interesting, and I applied. And she was horrified, right? Because like CARE has existed for 75 years and has this massive footprint. So I just say that to say that if you're just kind of paying attention to what piques your interest and following what seems intriguing to you, I think that you'll find things hopefully that feel fulfilling along the way.
And I think that passion and expertise always shines through, because you're more engaged in it. And I think it's almost priceless when someone is passionate and they love what they do, and you know they're really good at it. Like, and I think you just by being honest and you know saying to the recruiter, well, I hadn't heard of them, you know, right, but right, you're laughing, but I think that's great, and I think it's good. And I think too often, and I don't know whether I mean it will come down to, there's loads of different factors that can affect, but too often perhaps maybe some women are quite or can be, oh my gosh, quick to people please and to say what people want to hear. Actually, by being brave and by being honest, it can do so much more for you. You know, we should try being more like that, I think, quite often. And that's not the case for everyone, but certainly for those listening that maybe feel that you know, they're not as honest as they perhaps could be. It's always best to be honest and just to be quite frank, and to do something. You know, when you were talking about curiosity, it got me thinking, because I was like, it was my curiosity that perhaps got me into tech, because I was like, oh, what, you know, what about this? I had no tech experience, and it, you know, and I just kind of got absorbed into it because I love to learn. I love to be, I just I became, obsessed is a strong word, but I just loved the pace in which everything moved, and the learning and development for everyone around me. And it was just, there was always something new and something different going on, and that to me was super interesting. I, I had no experience. I'm not a designer, I'm not a developer. So when people talk to me about working in tech, sometimes I'm perhaps a little bit like you, Brittany, and that I'm like, oh yeah, I don't, but actually I do. Like, I do work heavily in tech, but I'm not. I always sometimes caveat. I'm like, oh, I'm not a tech person, but yeah, I've got a bit of experience these days.
Yes.
So
Well, and I think it sounds
gosh,
like part of that is accepting, maybe is the right word, that like career pathways are not always linear. And in my current position, I get a lot of folks who sometimes reach out and want to have a conversation, who are interested in international development, for example, or interested in humanitarian work. And I feel a little bad because I think many of them have this very narrow view of what they're thinking of, like, I need to get a master's degree in international relations, and then I need to like do X, Y, and Z internship, and then I'm gonna like apply for this job at a place like CARE. And I, again, am always a bit honest of being like, I kind of stumbled my way into this space. But again, it's like paying attention to what you enjoy and what you're curious about. When I worked in higher education, part of my job was leading service learning study abroad trips to South Africa, where I would get students, many of whom who had like never traveled out of the Midwest in the United States, to like literally fly across the world and think about what gender and race look like in a very different context. And I loved that. And so I think part of probably what sparked that curiosity when I saw the job advertisement for what I'm currently doing was like thinking about international relations and global work, and how do we think about like this global civil society. So yeah. And the other piece around gender norms is that many women and people of color and people from marginalized identities, and we have social research to show this, will often think they have to meet every single requirement on a job application, job description before applying. And then men on the flip side, like if they're like see half of them, they're like, oh yeah, I'm like, I check like half of those boxes, I'm gonna apply. Because often, especially in our current work environment, like job descriptions are like an employer's wish list of like the unicorn they wish they could see. No single person has all of those strengths and requirements, and so it's again just like having a little bit of the irreverence to be like, well, I don't really know what that is, but like it looks interesting, let me apply. And sometimes that works out, sometimes it doesn't. But I would just encourage anyone listening to not think that you have to follow a very linear path, because especially in our current work environment, I don't think that's how career ladders work anymore.
I definitely agree. I think, and looking to the future as well, they're not going to operate like that. There's going to be a lot of change. Um, I look at mine definitely wasn't linear. Like, it's just, there are so many different ways in, and it's very easy, I think, for people to think that like there's only one way in or one path, and there's really not. There are so many different avenues open. It's about being able to have the confidence to explore perhaps some of those different avenues. Confidence or curiosity, a combination of both perhaps.
Exactly.
But I loved something that you said earlier, and it made me think experience. And you were talking about, going in and getting the experience, getting your hands dirty. And I think if anyone's listening, maybe another, like, something to build on that, Brittany, would be to, don't be afraid to reach out to people that are doing something that you might want to do. Because whilst it's very easy to assume, oh, they're not going to reply, or they're not, you just don't know. And so many times I have spoken with people that have been like, well, I sent an email, or I made a phone call, or I just reached out to this person like, because I wanted some advice, or I wanted to understand more about that particular role. And actually, there have been so many times where it's paid off. And it has worked it's worked really well, and it's been very beneficial to the person asking. And it's really helped them kind of get a foot in the door, almost, to get some experience and to get some insight to be able to understand if that is right for them, if that's the right direction, if that's the right path for them. And you mentioned earlier, like the internships. If it doesn't work out and it's not something you want to do, it's like, that's not a bad thing. It's absolutely great that you have found that out much sooner and much earlier on through an internship than an actual job that maybe you have relocated for, or done something else for. Like, it can be a wonderful thing, and it might not feel like it at the time. It might feel like a hard knock maybe, but actually in the grand scheme of everything, you can reframe that and put that a very positive light on that.
Yes. And I think those like informational phone calls or coffees or, virtual meetings that you were just talking about are so important, because I can think at different points in my career when I've been, looking for my next challenge or next opportunity. There's definitely been some calls I've had with people that were similarly like just kind of cold email, cold reaching out on LinkedIn. And I would just be chatting with them about like, what do you do? What does your day look like? How did you get into this? And I would walk away from those conversations thinking, that doesn't really sound like something that aligns with my strengths or that I would be most suited to. That's such valuable information, because before I got to the point of even like applying or starting a job in that context, I learned like yeah, actually that's probably like not the direction I want to head. And that's such useful information.
It's really good. And I probably every so often I do have random people that will reach out and ask me something or ask for some advice, and that's lovely, like, because that's, if I can help and I think I'm best placed to help, I will always take the time to be able to do that. Now, I'm not someone that has a huge following and loads of people reach out to me, so you're not going to be able to help everyone, but definitely I know that there are people out there that would always make time for a quick coffee or a quick call, or it just to help, because there is, I feel obliged to help that, because people did help me when I was looking, and I was wanting to know more information. I did reach out to people. I did go and have conversations, and even to this day, I still reach out to people that maybe I don't know firsthand, and I'll ask for advice, or I'll ask for some insight or understanding to help me better inform any like decisions that I make. So yeah.
I love it.
So, Brittany, in what ways do you see technology being used to address societal challenges? And how can women in tech contribute to, I guess, positive social impact through their work?
Yes, I think we're in this moment where global inequality has never been worse. Whether it's conflict, climate change, still kind of recovering from the pandemic and thinking about what the next health related crisis might be. Like there are just so many massive social problems that as a global community need to be addressed. I get really excited at thinking about this intersection of technology and social impact. I am not on the design phase we already talked about what some of those apps could look like. But as a sociologist and thinking about structures and systems, I get really interested in like, how do we apply some of what's happening in international development spaces around locally led work, including places in the global south that historically have been left out of some of these conversations, and bridging those leaders, those community activists who are already doing this work in their own context with these technology companies or people who are developing, thinking about technology, because I think there's like so much work that could happen there, and it probably should not be, Silicon Valley or wherever our tech centers are in North America, like dreaming up what might be useful to someone in a different place in the world with no contextual information, right? So like how do we make those conversations and resource sharing, capacity sharing happen? I don't know what that looks like, but I just think there's like gotta be some work to do there. I know CARE, as an example of this, has a project with Care Nepal, so our Nepal country team, that developed this game called Go Nisha No Go. You can look it up, but it's basically a digital game that you like download as an app on your phone that's designed to like positively shift gender social norms. So, and it's designed for like teenagers. So you like download this app and it kind of is, it's like a role-playing game and asks you this like series of questions, and like Nisha makes different choices, and it deals with topics like contraception and like becoming sexually active, and these are pretty taboo topics, especially in certain places. And so it's a safe way to help young people think about some of these topics, and like as Nisha makes different choices in this game, they get to see like the consequences of those choices. And the team that's working on this, along with some partners, has like published research on what they're seeing with this. I'm happy to share it with folks who are interested. But like, there's things like that where I'm just like, this is so cool and so amazing, and there's got to be more of like whatever that is that we could do globally. And to get back to our earlier point, we need women, we need people who've been historically excluded from these conversations to be part of those design processes.
Totally agree. Oh my gosh, that case study. I need to know more information about it. You have to share information. And for anyone listening, what we'll do is when this goes out, we'll make sure that we link out to it, because that's a fabulous opportunity to shine light on such an incredible project, and just very topical right now, like just that role-playing piece and just understanding the impact of certain decisions. It's a really clever concept, and I hadn't heard of the case study before, so thank you so much for sharing that. Is that a new case study? Is that something that
it's new? Yeah, like the research just came out. No, it just like, this is like all within, I would say, like the last 6 months, and literally like in the last week or two was when I saw some of the findings from the study they did, because it's social behavioral change. Like, how do you incentivize people to think differently about some of these things?
That's amazing, absolutely amazing. Oh my gosh, I've got my phone right here. I'm like, I just want to download it now and like have a play and see how it works. But that's brilliant. What an just an incredible initiative. And the research, it's, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but is it showing that it is having an impact? Like, yes. It is making a change?
Yes, yeah. It was all very like, the results were in the direction you would hope, that like people who've engaged with this game are shifting how they're thinking about social norms and contraception. And even some of what it gets at is like the interpersonal norms in like a dating relationship. So like for this young girl, if the guy she's dating is like, oh, let's go to this private place or whatever, like how does she negotiate some of her own agency in making choices about who she's interacting with and how she's interacting with them? So yes, it's the research is positive, and it's hot off the press. I will share it so that we can include it in the notes with this podcast.
Amazing. And when you get a project like this, and obviously it's out in, let's say, one particular country, would that be something that you would look to scale and perhaps adapt for the different countries that you operate in?
Yes, and the partner we had worked with on developing this actually had an earlier version of the app in India, and it was partly based on that framework and the research and studies they had done there that they were then able to say, okay, like what would make sense in this other context, in this case, the country of Nepal. So yes, I think there's like so much potential for Care, but also the work with our partners to think about how this scales. And I think, to go back to our earlier point, this is our constant struggle of like the learning for a specific case versus scaling, because every place is so different, and there's a lot of momentum and efficiency that comes when you find something that works and can try and adapt it widely.
Amazing, absolutely amazing. And Brittany, before I close this out, is there, and I'm putting you on the spot and I apologize now in advance, but if there had to be one single takeaway from today that you would want our listeners to take out of this conversation, what would it be? Just one. And I know that's hard. There's been a few goodies.
I think I would say be curious and follow those curiosities, because I think, not to get too deep here, but as a human being, we live in a capitalist economy where we're like selling our labor in transaction in order to get money so that we can meet our basic needs. So there's a human element there. But I think with recognizing that context of we're all selling our labor, how can you do it in a way that brings you as much joy and fulfillment as possible? And I think if you can lean into what you find interesting and excites you and that you want to learn more about, and recognizing that may change over time. Like what I was really curious about 10 years ago might be different than what I'm curious about today. And I, navigate what I'm doing professionally perhaps differently because of that. So I would say, that's what I would say. Yeah, follow that curiosity and see where it takes you.
That's absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, Brittany. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I definitely will be going away and researching some of the things that we've discussed today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Puff. This has been such a delight. I appreciate the thoughtful questions and conversation.